Daylight savings time. Ben Franklin traveled in England and noticed that the sun was up, but people had the shutters on their house closed and they were still asleep in bed. And when you're in that northern latitude, it is in the wintertime, the sun comes up at 11, goes down at 4, but in the summertime, the sun comes up at 4 and goes down at 11. And it was Ben Franklin who had the idea of, gee, why don't we change the time so that they can move it back and they can get to work because you can work earlier if the sun's up. Nothing happened, but he did have that idea. Well, what happened in America? The World War II war effort began, and many of the factories were not filled full of electric lights. They would have these big factories and they would have sort of like a barn with the ceiling open to the sky. And you would need light to come in to help you manufacture in the factory. And so it was during this time with FDR, who was centralizing a lot of things and making decisions, he decided to implement the daylight savings time. Why? So that we could have more work and effort to fight Hitler. And this is a very patriotic time in America's past where everybody would pitch in and do everything they can. And this is also when FDR raised the taxes a whole lot. And they would have sayings, fight the Axis, pay your taxes. And so he raised taxes through the roof. Unfortunately, a side effect was after the war, so much rebuilding went on in Germany and Japan that many businesses said, you know what, we can avoid FDR's taxes if we move our factory overseas. And so this began something called outsourcing. And so 50 years of that, now we see most of the factories are overseas. So you squeeze a sponge, the water goes out. You raise taxes on businesses in America, and then you wonder why the businesses are moving overseas. If you want businesses and jobs to come back to America, you have to make it more profitable for businesses to be located here than there. And so that is another topic in a book that I wrote called The Interesting History of Income Tax. But daylight savings time. Now, I have always had a problem with daylight savings time changing on a Sunday. It's like, why don't we change it on a Saturday? Why don't we change it on a day during the week? Why Sunday? Sunday's church day. And so you have sometimes the pastors will have people wake up late and they'll miss the church service because, oh, I forgot to change my clock. Why don't we do that with the business? Why is the church so far down the ladder for the government that they want to have that happen? Well, another interesting thing is time zones, all right? You have the Eastern time zone and the Central and the Mountain time and the Pacific time. Where did that come from? Railroads. The past would be as soon people would set their own clocks based on when the sun would come up and so forth, but railroads, and when they're built and these railroads could go so fast, they would leave one town at 6 o'clock in the morning and they would get to the other town at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then the next town at 6 o'clock in the morning because the little towns didn't set their clocks. And so they decided, okay, look, we're going to set this whole zone here to one time zone. We're going to coordinate the clocks. And so then we're going to have another time zone and another time zone. And so it was the advent of the railroad that gave birth to the idea of time zones. I'll give you an example of time zones. Russia is so big, it has 12 time zones from all the way St. Petersburg on one side and Siberia on the other side, where the Bering Strait connects with Alaska. Some of the ones you have time zones and daylight savings time, and some cities like Indianapolis, they could be Central or Eastern. They chose Eastern, but sometimes they don't. Some cities don't recognize the daylight savings time, and so you'll have the time zone switch in some areas, but won't switch in the other. I had a problem one time when I was in Sedona, Arizona, doing an interview and didn't realize that it's on mountain time, but they don't recognize the daylight savings time, and so the hours didn't switch the way I thought they switched, and I missed an interview. But it is fascinating how this happens around the globe, and but The beginning of the changing of the calendars went all the way back to Julius Caesar. He's the first one that switched from a lunar calendar to a solar calendar. But the Lord is the Lord of the whole earth, and it's Him that we honor every day of the year. So God bless you. Thanks for watching.